Welcome to this HE Researchers session with Emeritus Professor Vivien Hodgson. I'm John Brindle. I am Learning Design Manager at Edge Hill University, but I'm also a PhD student on the E-Research and TEL programme at Lancaster University.
Hello everyone, I'm Vivien. I'm also at exactly the same stage as John. I'm the Innovation and Scholarship Manager at Queen Mary, University of London. And can I just say, as of last month, we are now officially an award-winning webinar series as awarded by GIST. So thank you very much for your support.
And so now it leaves me to introduce our speaker for today. We're really pleased to welcome Emeritus Professor Vivien Hodgson, who is Professor Emeritus of Networked Management Learning, and comes from a lot of interest in learner experience and open learning, which has influenced her teaching and research. And along with David McConnell, Professor Hodgson was one co-chair of the International Biannual Conference on Networked Learning, and up until 2020, co-edited the Springer book series Research and Network Learning. And before officially retiring, Professor Hodgson led a project called LUMSnet to support and encourage staff to develop innovative and critical pedagogical design and online spaces. It's an honour to welcome you to the series, and I'm sure we'll all give you a warm welcome. So I'll hand over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, John and Vivien, for organising this and inviting me. I recognise some of the names who are here and not others. I'm very happy and pleased to be invited to talk about what is next year my 50 years of being in academia, which is quite frightening in itself. Something that you don't normally reflect upon or ask yourself what has been important throughout those 50 years. So in that sense, it's actually been a useful exercise to think about. Despite the bit of blurb about myself, I actually formally retired in July 2020. I keep having to remind myself when I retired, because actually, I was saying before everybody arrived, retiring from academia is an incredibly hard thing to actually achieve. But I did have a plan of wanting to move away from academic writing to doing more creative non-fiction. And I was actually planning to go on a creative non-fiction rural writing retreat almost the weekend I replied, but that got cancelled because of COVID and due to papers being unfinished and PhD students not completed. It took me quite a while, in fact I'm here now talking to you, to stop being fully and wholly an academic. I did, however, manage to get on the rural writing retreat in 2022. And in that context, I met an American friend, a creative writing friend, who actually has helped me a lot in general, but in particular writing a chapter which I mentioned in the blurb and which I might come back to. She gave me a lot of really useful advice, along with a couple of other American friends. And when I was thanking her at the end, she said, "It takes a village." And I thought that's a really nice phrase, particularly for someone who's worked with learning communities and the idea of community. And so I actually looked it up, and from an American perspective, it's very much related to Hillary Clinton's book from 1996, apparently. And she wrote a book, It Takes a Village, but with a subtitle, which is around children. But the origin of the saying is actually an African proverb, which translates into, it takes a village to raise a child. So in practice, my friend, who's called Francesca, was not actually thinking so much of that, but as generalizing out to how it's important to have a village around you to assist you, to help you in all our lives. And it makes a difference to what we're able to achieve and what we do. So that kind of actually in some ways helped me to structure what I wanted to talk about. I found it really a quite appealing term, the way she interprets it. But taking a slight sidestep for a minute, going back to what some of you will know and is in my professorial title, is a lot of the work I've done is around learning communities and network learning. And those concepts of related to learning community and network learning have been important throughout in different ways my research and academic career for both research and teaching. However, despite their importance, I often struggled, and I think this is quite an interesting reflection, to see how those kind of ideas and principles could translate easily into everyday life. And in particular, during my early career as an academic, while I was running a pub with my partner. And I'll come back to that a bit. But I recently tried to actually take the principles of learning community and apply them to a pub community, almost as a piece of hybrid writing, where I was trying to draw on academic ideas, but write it in a kind of creative non-fiction kind of way. In the event, I found there was a lot of crossover in doing that to research as storytelling and narrative research, which has become more prominent in academic writing in recent times. In the chapter, I almost turned around my original intention, and I found, actually looking closer or doing a close read of the pub community from a journal I kept for a short time while running the pub, that there were things we could learn from the community of work, from that community, i.e. the pub community, for working with a learning community. And that was quite intriguing in some ways. My point, however, is not to tell you so much about the chapter, which I've just done, so much as to say, working on it with feedback from Francesco and two other American creative writers that I work with, that we work as an online Zoom group, which prefer working with them in Zoom, I have to point out. I found the idea of it takes a village really appertains to my working life as an academic and as a researcher. And in reflecting back on my career, and which is what I'm going to talk about more now, I was able to identify a number of things that have been and felt really important to me. And the number one, almost the most important, was the people I've worked with. They've always been important. And if I go back to when I did my PhD, which was 75, 78 at Surrey University, and it was on lecturing and learning and students' experience, I was fortunate enough to be in a PH group that actually included David McConnell, Diana Laureard, and Liz Beattie. Ironically, Liz now lives in the same village as me, so she's definitely part of my village. Lewis Elton, who set up the Institute of Educational Technology at Surrey for all, and invited a whole load of PhD students and researchers, of which several, in addition to the ones I mentioned of Liz, Diana and David, included students, PhD students from South Africa, Chile, Brazil, Kuwait. It was a very mixed population, and some of them were actual political refugees. So it's quite interesting, you know, I'm talking about really 50 years ago, and it feels a bit cyclic in that sense. And all of us were very happy to take Lewis's lead in wanting to change the face of higher education and educational research. And he'd invited, for example, Malcolm Pilot as a visiting lecturer. I don't know how many of you have heard of Malcolm Pilot. He's famous for the work on illumination as evaluation. And also we had as an occasional overseas visitor, Ferenc Martin, who was in his early work on phenomenography. Actually, I'm not quite sure how I managed to be there. I always felt I was never good enough. And I hated talking, actually. I still do hate talking. So that is something I feel you never quite grow out of, at least I didn't. But I know I wanted to be there. I'd studied biological sciences for my first degree. I had struggled with the way it was taught until I got my final year, where we did a lot of project work. And then after I'd completed it and done a couple of other things, I saw an advert in the New Sciences for a PhD scholarship to study the lecture method in the sciences. And I went for it because it was something I really wanted to know more about. I was fortunate enough to get the scholarship, and despite my frankly not great academic record up to that point. And this kind of brings me around to another point which is important to me throughout my academic career, which is to research the things that are important to you, that you feel passionate about. I knew some lecturers made me more interested than others. I knew that my university course had not inspired me. It had left me thinking I'd never get a job as a biological scientist, which was true, actually. But there was a chance here to look closer at why I felt the way I did. And as luck or fortune would have it, I found a way to do that, which appeared to me to give me real insights, would give me the real insights I was looking for, a research approach, a methodology. Methodology is, again, something that's always important in research, of course. And as research students at Surrey, we were part of an early drive away from positivist research. In evaluation, there was people like Malcolm Parlett and Robert Stake writing stuff about illumination and beyond the numbers game. And there was emergence of action research advocated by the likes of Stephen Kemmis. And more generally, they were in sociological research. You had people like Howard Becker writing Boys in White. But this was all seen very radical and very much criticised by conventional, traditional education researchers and sociologists alike. And too radical, really, to risk following as a PhD student. So how do you choose a methodology as a research student is always an important question in terms of being radical. I mean, there was one PhD student at Surrey while we were there who followed literally illumination as evaluation and actually really struggled to get it passed. It was too big a risk. Phenomenography, on the other hand, with its roots in educational psychology, offers something new with a different perspective, which Ferenc was calling a second-order perspective, and just seemed a better option and a slightly safer one. And it focused on student-learner experience, which is exactly what I was looking to do. And as it happened, I also had Ferenc as my external examiner. So, you know, it wasn't too much of a risk in that sense, fortunately for me. As early phenomeноgraphers, we were our own village, trying out a new way to do educational research, including, as it happened, a lot of people at Lancaster, when Noel Entwistle, Di Hounsell and Paul Ramsden all worked here. Also, there was Graham Gibbs and Alistair Morgan at the OU, as well as the 4 key researchers from Gothenburg that worked with Ferenc. All of us eventually contributing to the Experience of Learning book. And interestingly, and I think for good reason, phenomenography remains a popular methodology to this day with PhD research students, even though we've passed through several other methodological phases since the late 1970s. But for me at the time, it offered a way that really resonated with what I was hoping to do and what I wanted to explore in more detail. So as I say, methodology is always going to be important. I was still with my PhD to write up. In 1978, I got the job at Lancaster at the then Centre for Study of Management Learning. as a research assistant. In truth, although it did seem a good opportunity, my main reason for applying to Lancaster was a loved one. I had a partner living up in the northwest, and I wanted to move as near to him as I could get. And I think this is important as well. We need a personal life as well as a professional life. It happened to work out really well for me, but that was the reason I came. And that was also the reason 2 years later we ended up running a pub in Bentham, at which point I became an academic on short-term contracts and a landlady for 14 years. It's not something I would recommend as an important choice, although it was a very influential one on me. But having a personal life is important, I think, however you want to have that. My contract actually became permanent in 1984, so I spent 6 years on temporary contracts, one after another, which is still very much the case for a lot of people, of course. And I'd started to research open learning and information technology. I don't know whether people have heard of Bob Lewis now, but he and I got funding for a small ITOL, Information Technology and Open Learning project, which actually David McConnell came to work with us in the now Department of Management Learning. This led on to a large EU JITOL, just-in-time open learning project, with a lot of folk from educational research, including in particular Peter Goodyear, but also Marie Saunders, Christine Steeples, Joan Machel, as well as with other colleagues from from Management Learning, the department, including in particular Michael Reynolds, who I've worked a lot with over the years. So far, things had gone pretty well, though I never, oh yeah, this is an interesting point. I never quite appreciated how well, and continued to lack the confidence to speak up in seminars, at school meetings and hated conferences. And to a greater or lesser extent, I probably still do. However, working with people I enjoyed working with and doing what I found to be important and worthwhile research was great. It was not necessarily, however, seen that way in the then School of Management, as David and I did more, as it was known then, computer-mediated communication projects. And as we came to see it in JITOL network learning, the head of schools saw Management Learning Department and our work in particular as not appropriate, poor research and not theoretical enough. After review of the department's work, including our new CMC in Management Learning, an online master's degree that we developed in 1989, Peter Goodyear, as the then head of Department of Educational Research, got a letter suggesting 3 of us, including myself and David McConnell, should be transferred to educational research. At the time, none of us actually thought that was a good idea for all sorts of reasons, including everyone, Peter and educational research and people in management learning, we were working with Peter on the JITOL project and the other people, but we didn't want to move over to management learning. And it never actually happened. But the point is, it left us feeling very vulnerable and our work not valued. And not long after that, David left to take a readership at Sheffield University. And a year or so after that, I applied for a secondment to work on a new, for the European Commission, Socrates action called Open and Distance Learning. This was in Brussels. Open and distance learning was a complete new area for the EU to be funding collaborative projects across Europe. Both of us at the time feeling our careers at Lancaster were going nowhere very fast. And I got the secondment and I spent 3.5 years working with the EU Commission in Brussels. And then I did return to Lancaster. I actually thought long and hard about that, but Lancaster is a good place to work, despite not liking our work at the time. And anyway, I decided to come back. And I found that the now new dean was much more supportive of our work in what was becoming known as technology enhanced learning. But I think I learned an important lesson from this, and that is, from that experience, it is important to have senior management on your side. And what is more, I began to realise this is something you have to work at. Academic life is ultimately about reputation as much as it is about your research. That is why publications and citations get forever pushed as important. But it's not only about relationships and reputations within your own field, it is equally within your own faculty, your own university. Even then, it is never easy when, as in my case, you're a woman, or for many other people, come from different backgrounds to that of what is basically the established white male core of most universities. Now, this is changing, has changed, but it is still present, and it's not changing fast enough. So the last, to me, important thing was to be aware of how you are viewed as a person. Some people are inherently more likely to be promoted ahead of others. On my return from Brussels, I had finally been promoted to senior lecturer, but I had a much younger male colleague who joined the department a few years after me, had a similar track record to me, but was promoted long before I was to both senior lecturer and then to chair. This is a story I've heard from many women colleagues. They can't see why their cases are not being considered when their male colleagues seem to go through without touching the sides. Now, I'm not saying it's easy for male colleagues, but that's how some of us have experienced it. And to be fair, my CV wasn't enhanced by my time in Brussels, though tremendously beneficial in other ways. It didn't include, as a result of working very hard on European projects, top-rated publications over the years I spent there. The EU projects I ran on my return, including in the case of one called Equality in E-Learning, a project that had a €1 million budget and 13 universities from both the UK and mainland Europe, was not seen as real research income. And as I got more senior, ran more projects, established, as John mentioned, the Research in Networked Learning book series, as well as worked on more committees, I began to realise how hard it is to make a chair, as in my case, a woman, certainly at that time and in the management school. Had we not got a woman dean in the form of Sue Cox, I think I would have taken even longer. I was the first woman to be appointed chair in our department in 2005, and I was the first woman to become a head of an academic department in the management school in 2006. By this time, I had to speak up at heads meetings. And actually, to be fair, the 4 years I was head of department gave me not so much more confidence, but the need to speak. But I never did speak at Senate. It took me much longer to gain that kind of confidence. Eventually, I became the school's rep on the promotions committee, which offered me even more insights into the ways and byways of getting promoted. There's a load of workmen outside my house, which I could well start packing up and get my dog barking, just warning you. So the final point on this aspect was while I became a visiting chair at Aalborg University in 2012, I never actually got past point 2 of 6 on band 1 of the 3 bands of professorial scale. And, you know, there were reasonable reasons for that. I'd lost my partner. I'd done 4 years as an head of department. And things had dipped in terms of publications, to the point I was told there's no point in applying for a further pay award. And I myself got to the point where I didn't even want to try. I didn't want to put myself through that, because I had my village where I was well respected and cared about, including many people in the management school, where before retiring, I led the Lumsnet project with members of each department of the school. I realised, looking back, that all meant more to me than getting another pay grade. So in writing this really very abridged version of my career, I mean, obviously I couldn't mention all the things that I've done during the last 50 years, but some important and I think valuable points came up for me during reflecting upon it. So basically, just to summarise, I think the people I've worked with, respected and cared about, have been really important to me throughout my career. During research that is important to me, and I believe is important, is very central to what I do. Methodology and how it works for what I want to do and achieve is clearly always important to a researcher. Cultivating a personal life as well as a professional one, I found an important dimension for me. And these are all what have been important to me. They're not necessarily important to everybody. When things are not going well, to take positive action, even if it doesn't always work out. And making yourself visible to senior management as well as to your research community. And finally, which relates to my last points that I was covering, it's okay to be simply content with what you have achieved. And as I said, it takes a village. And that's really all I wanted to say, because I think it's important to give you an oversight of how I've experienced my academic life and research. But as I said, I can't cover everything. And really, I wanted to ensure that I gave you enough, hopefully, that you could ask any questions or have a discussion around the points that I've raised, basically.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that that insight into your trajectory, and those points are really pertinent, I think, particularly the first one, which I think is really, you know, again, you know, I'm sure Vivien won't mind me saying this, but you know, we work together really well, and we enjoy each other's company, and we talk to each other quite frequently, and that some of that has come out of this. And just kind of how much of your
by the way, whoever put up what a pub is, thank you very much.
Yes.
I find this happens a lot when I'm working with the American group. There's loads of words, particularly around public houses, actually, and bars, that they just don't recognise.
Yes, it's yeah. I actually went to a pub in Canada. Somebody who they actually call their bar a pub, and they'd done it like an English pub.
Yeah, you mostly see Irish pubs elsewhere rather than English pubs. Anyway, sorry about that.
No, that's okay. So just a question. I'm going to be very selfish and ask the first question, if that's okay. Just about that, you know, there's people that you respect and things like that. How much of the kind of research was born out of that, and that did you find? Did you co-create quite a lot when you were researching, and when you with the things that you were looking at from those friendships and those things that you were looking?
Oh, totally. I mean, David and I set up the network learning series as an obvious example. We set up the research in network learning, and the EQUAL project and an ESRC project before that was with Liz Beattie, David McConnell, another colleague, Sarah Mann, and myself. So, and as I say, Liz now actually lives across the road from me. So and we did papers together and projects together. It's been a very fruitful and productive, as it happens, PhD student cohort in that case, but other people as well throughout my academic life, including people like, for example, Thomas Ryberg and Martin Delat, who took over the Network Learning series. I worked a lot with Thomas and Lone, whose second name I can never pronounce, Homefield Feds or something. I've written papers and done work with them in Aalborg. So you have to write some stuff on your own and you have to do your PhD on your own, but I actually prefer to work with other people.
That's really interesting, because I'm interested in that kind of collaboration stuff. So actually, now I've selfishly asked my question. I just want to. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask? You can either put them into the chat, or please feel free to unmute and ask a question. Or if you use the raise hand function.
I have a question on the subject of kind of co-creation and working with your collaborators over the years. How did you put up with them? Because I'm finding John really annoying. In all seriousness,
incredibly bad. It's really difficult.
How do you deal with? Because let me rephrase the question in a serious way, because John and I actually really like each other. For the record, how do you deal with, I guess, disagreements, different opinions? How do you come to some kind of middle ground? Because at the end of the day, you have to create an end product that has to be agreeable by, how have you got any kind of tips for us?
No, you've got to like and respect each other, obviously. And if you're working with people you don't like and don't respect and think it'd be a good idea for other reasons, I don't think it works. It's interesting in some ways that I did produce collaboratively and co-worked probably most with David, but we're still in contact. He's now retired in Australia, and I actually saw him last year in Scotland, and it's a long-term commitment. And I mentioned Michael Reynolds as well, because he was someone I actually started on the same day as management learning. But yeah, some people, there's other people that I found more or less easy to work with because they work in different ways to you as well. So I remember when I was first working with another guy in my department, and I can understand it now that I started doing creative non-fiction, he had to be selective about every single word and the way he put everything. And to me, it was just, writing was just a stream of consciousness almost. So I wasn't actually a good writer in that sense. And it's something that I learned over many years. But he already had that. And it just used to drive me nuts because it took him ages. And I was already ready to move on to the next thing. But you just believe it'll work, I guess.
Do you hear that, John? You've got another 30 years to put up with me.
I can cope with that.
No, actually it's been 50.
Wow.
Okay, well, 50 would just Vivien
50 with David, 45 with Michael.
Wow.
And
it's really lovely to hear this long-term friendships. Yeah.
Yeah. And and you get new ones as you go along. I currently have worked a lot with someone called Joanne Larty. We wrote a paper about the Lumsnet project. I'd never really worked with Joanne before, and we worked really well together. And we published a paper in BJet last year, so that was nice. Margaret's asked a question, Marguerite, I should say. Well, it's actually, it's interesting because a lot of my, David included, they're not in my location, and that's why I spend so much time on Zoom. Although I don't Zoom with David, but I certainly Zoom with the 3 Americans who are, you know, they are now my writing companions, if you will. So I see them as writing companions, whereas with previous, like David, like Michael, Linda Parrington is another one. She's up in near Aberdeen now. Meet her about 3 times a year with Michael because she was one of Michael's PhD students. But you know, we've been in a kind of action learning set for 20 years, and these feed you, I think, and help you to survive in the otherwise difficult world of academia, where people like to be argumentative and attacking more than collaborative and supportive. Often it's changed, and in educational research it's much nicer anyway.
Especially Lancaster. I found anyway.
There's actually really interesting. Maria's put an interesting question in the chat there. I'll just read it out. So to what extent do you see it as important that we continue to research co-creation, collaboration, and peer learning, or are we now past that in kind of post-digital AI-driven worlds? Do you think?
Well, for me personally, thank you, Maria. The post-digital doesn't feel a threat. AI, artificial intelligence, a lot of people are seeing it as a threat, but then they saw information technology as a threat. I don't know enough about it. I mean, clearly it's a problem, but this is me talking, and I'm not being, I haven't put someone else in my place. And I spent a recent dinner with family, and one of my nephews was busy writing an essay, and he says, "Oh, chatbot's doing it for me." But he was playing around. He's finished university. He was literally playing around. So I don't know where all that's going. And in a way, I think that's one of my advantages of actually in the creative nonfiction world. They're as worried about it as what academics are worried about it. Everybody's worried about it, but I'm not the one that's going to be researching it, I'm afraid, or doing anything about it.
Do you think we should
so
be?
That's not a very good answer, to be honest.
I was just kind of pick up on that. Do you think it's important that we continue to research that co-creation and collaboration and peer learning
I always
stuff?
think that's important. I mean, to me, doing research, any research, even that research that feels individual, is a co-creation and is never done in isolation. So for me, that will always be important. But, you know, maybe in the future things will change. I don't know. But there are things, and people are saying this, that you can only do from an emotional and supportive level between humans. I mean, having said that, I'm sure that could change as well, but the emotional and reflective aspect is very, at the moment, person orientated. I don't think human is probably the best word to use. But I don't want to be tripping over this kind of stuff, to be honest, because I haven't looked at it and studied it enough. I'm like any other person, just listening to people's commentaries and thoughts. I'm not reading research papers around it these days. I'm trying to write my memoir in creative nonfiction. Actually, to be honest, I was really pleased, unbelievably pleased, that I retired just as COVID was starting.
I can imagine. I think quite a few of us feel like we wish we had with the amount of work that it created. Oh, Jane's put something. Hi, Vivien. Your academic journey sounds very interesting. Thanks for sharing. Given your experiences, have you noticed any difference for women progressing through their academic careers under the leadership of a woman versus a man?
it was interesting when I was on the promotion committee, 3 of the deans of faculties at that time were women. And I, of course, was a woman representative. The union representative was a woman. And the, what do you call it, PVC for education was a woman. And the registrar, was she on it? So it was almost half and half woman. But it was still, every year there was a review of why there wasn't more gender balance in the promotions. And it wasn't at the promotions committee level, I don't think. It was further down the tree where what women take on, how people see their work. At the time I was on the promotions committee, women weren't being pushed forward. And to be honest, it wasn't my department, although I remember a new professor coming and saying, why aren't you a chair yet? It was the dean. I went to talk to the dean, which is why I'm saying you need to cultivate senior management as well, who happened to be the woman. So if you don't make those steps and make them in a positive way and cultivate, sounds the wrong kind of term, but it's making yourself visible and people appreciating your work, I think, for me. And I can only talk about my own experience, and that a lot of women were not coming through when I was on the promotions committee, which was till about 2018. So it wasn't that long ago. But you do see many more women coming into senior positions now. But I don't know the current statistics. I know it's still biased against them.
And Jane's making a good point about, I wonder what would happen if the reviews were blind or double blind. Could that even be accomplished?
Yeah, not sure that it could be accomplished.
But then I guess my question is, how,
you know, for example, when you apply for a job, you're not supposed to put, well, you can't put your date of birth. And I suppose, do you put your gender? I'm trying to think now on job applications. Long time since I've seen one. But you can soon work it out. Well, not out, obviously, actually. I mean, my name, for example, could be male or female. Lots of female names could be male or female. And it's true, more women do more committee work, but you know, I know a lot of men who do a lot of committee work as well. It's really, I mean, when you look at certainly in my case, when I look at some of the men I've worked with, they've been good, solid people. They've just got promoted sooner.
I've got a slightly different question, well, not it's quite a different question, if that's okay. And I'm hoping I'm not opening a new can of worms. So obviously you have co-created a theory, a conference, network learning things, everything, you know, I'm a big fan, so as many people at Lancaster. Do you remember that light bulb moment that happened, and how did you and your collaborators go from an idea to something that people in the academic world accept and cherish and respect? It's not too big a question to ask.
That's a huge question. And it took a long time. I remember when I was working in Brussels, actually, Peter Goodyear came out with the outline for the JITOL project that he was writing. No, research in network learning, advances in network learning, something like that. And he and Christine Steeples in particular had been working quite hard on it. And I remember specifically us discussing how we should describe, well, he wanted me to be involved because I was due to come back to Lancaster, and asking me how should we describe the idea of network learning, because it had only just started to be used by ourselves. And he had a particular outline for it. And the one thing I really remember saying it needs to include connection and being connected. So there was moments like that. And we did, then when I came back, we did the ESRC series on network learning. And then the JITOL project led to the first conference in network learning. So you just keep doing all sorts of things. And particularly with the conference, lots of people contributed with their own perspective and ideas on it. The EQUAL project was again trying to push and understand better what it was. So it's an ongoing process, and I think it still is an ongoing process. And post-digital education, and gosh, his name's just escaped me, but he's the editor of Post-Digital Science and Education, and he invited me and David to do a piece on how network learning is a area of post-digital, was a part of the development of post-digital education.
I think Marguerite put his name in.
I should.
Peter Jandrick.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think unless anyone's got any other questions, we can kind of bring this session to a close. It just leaves me to thank you so much again, Professor Hodgson, for giving up your time, and round of applause for you for presenting on your career and the kind of history and background to some of those things. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.